My name's Eric Anderson. I run research and development for Helix Remediate, and I'm going to be talking about automating security with Remediate. And then here in about 20 minutes or so, Steve Vargo from PNC is going to come up, and he's going to talk about how they're actually using these products in the wild, in the real world environment, to help remediate and help solve some of their security challenges. So, to get started, I'm really just going to ask a couple questions. Not expecting a whole lot of answers, but I'm going to ask them anyway. How often was your firm's sensitive data, note the word sensitive, breached in the last 12 months? Do we know? So this is a question that we asked from Forbes Insights on a survey recently. And surprisingly, almost half the people who answered, half the companies that answered, said that they've had a sensitive data breach at least twice in the last 1 year alone. Some of them up to 25 times. That's crazy. So this is what we know, right? How many data breaches have we had that we didn't know? Which is arguably, I would say, probably more along the lines of 75% at least. Second question. Between 2016 and 2017, this graph represents CVEs, or vulnerabilities that are found in the wild. Between 2016 and 2017, we actually doubled the number of vulnerabilities that have been found. How many people doubled their staff in order to take care of the extra load? I would argue nobody, right? I've been asking that question now for a year or two, and I've never seen a single customer, single person raise their hand and say, yes, we doubled our staff, even though the work actually doubled. Now, you can see here we're looking at about from 6,000 up to about 16,000 over the course of a few years. Right now in 2019, we're actually on track to hit about 19,000 vulnerabilities found. I don't think we'll hit 20, but we might. If you were to extend this line back into the 90s, when we first started tracking vulnerabilities, right? We were hitting about 400 to 500 a year, roughly. And it was pretty flat for a long time. 400 to 500, maybe 1,000 in that range. And then a few years ago, it started to slope up and started to slope up higher and higher and higher. What does that look like? That's exponential growth, right? Classic hockey stick, if you go all the way back into the 90s, it's a classic hockey stick for exponential growth. And what's crazy is these 2 years alone, just the last 2 years, ignore 2019 for a moment, it's going to be, again, close to 20,000. Just these last 2 years alone, we uncovered more vulnerabilities. This is about half the vulnerabilities that have been found since we started tracking vulnerabilities in the 90s, have been found in the last 2 years alone. And that's because we've got more software, obviously. There's more software components. It's getting more complex. But again, nobody's increasing their staff to help solve some of these problems. So we're going to be talking about ways that we can help you solve some of these problems without increasing your staff, specifically with automation. Now, what's the challenge? The challenge is we are, on average, as an industry, it's taking us about 85, 84 days to fix a vulnerability when it comes out. However, the hackers are weaponizing and implementing those exploits within about 30 days. So there's a pretty significant gap between when we're finding the vulnerabilities, when we're fixing them, and when hackers are able to actually utilize those and utilize the exploits that are coming out to break in. What happens when things go wrong? Major fines, right? British Airways, $230 million. Marriott, $123 million. Equifax, $500 million fine. And that's just the fines, right? On average, companies with a sensitive data breach, they lose about 20% of their customers and about 20% of their revenue also. So enough of the kind of scary stuff. What can we do about it, right? How can we help? First thing you got to ask is, where's your data? You have to understand where your data is if you want to be able to protect that data. And typically, your data resides in 3 areas. First one's the data center, of course. We've been dealing with that for many years. Second area is the public cloud. And the third area is your SaaS vendors. right? I would argue that 90% of your data sits in one of these three areas all around. But it's not quite that simple. Your data center is not just one thing, right? It's not just a data center. Your data center is actually multiple things put together. Maybe you've got a vCenter farm. You've got old blade servers racked and stacked on the wall somewhere. Maybe you've got a large Kubernetes cluster that you're deploying business applications in, or you've got a private cloud of AWS Outpost or Azure Stack. Similarly, if we look at public cloud is not just one thing. AWS, Azure, GCP, those are obviously the three big ones, but there's 15 or 20 more out there. And I'm not even going to really start with the SaaS vendors because there are thousands of these. I was managing a CISO roundtable event, in fact, a number of them this year. And one of the questions that we asked all the time is, well, where's your data? And we were talking specifically about SaaS. And on average, I was hearing about 400 to 500 SaaS vendors, how much each one of these CISOs had to manage. So where's their data? Their data is everywhere. Second question then is, how do you secure it? Well, there's really four key pieces to securing your data, right? First one is assessment. If you're not running an assessment, you don't know what kind of problems you have. An assessment could be a number of things. It could be something like a Qualys scan or a Tenable scan for vulnerabilities. That's one area, that's one possibility. If you're in the public cloud or if you're dealing with a SaaS vendor, you really want to understand also, well, what kind of configurations exist as you're out there. Second area is compliance. How bad is the situation? And compliance can mean a couple different things. You may be dealing with regulatory compliance as well. PCI, HIPAA, SOX, right? If you're dealing with financial data or healthcare data. Third one is remediation. You need to understand where the problems are, understand how bad the situation is, and you have to go fix the problems. And then finally, you have to keep them fixed, right? You have to have governance. And again, these span across wherever your data happens to sit, not just one area. So, how can we help with Helix Remediate? Helix Remediate is really a suite of products that all work seamlessly together to help you reduce the risk. I'm going to use risk instead of security. When I talk about cybersecurity, most people think about vulnerabilities and vulnerability management. Risk is much more than just a patch or a vulnerability. It's a suite of different areas all pulled together. So vulnerability management, definitely one of them. Patch management, absolutely. We need to patch. Just because there's not a CVE or vulnerability doesn't mean we don't need to patch. Configuration management, compliance management, they have to all play seamlessly together in order to help you reduce the risk of your environment. So let's dive into some of these. Let's take a look at vulnerability management, for example. Each one of these areas, we have in our Helix Remediate suite, we've got products that can help you solve some of these problems. So vulnerability management, for example, some of the key challenges that we're dealing with here, anybody that has scanned for vulnerabilities knows you typically get a massive list, 4 or 5, sometimes 600,000, 700,000 strong. Understanding what to remediate, what not to remediate, where to focus your time is a big challenge. So our vulnerability management product is able to ingest all your scanned data and understand, based on your ecosystem, where the vulnerabilities exist, right? We're not scanning, we understand what you have deployed, and we're able to marry up the vulnerabilities with the current state of your environment, with the patches, and also determine blind spots. So with each one of these products, what you're going to hear is a lot of those 4 key elements that we talked about, right? And one that is in every single one of these elements is automation, remediation. Every single one will have some kind of automated remediation because we firmly believe that the only way, if you're dealing with a hockey stick and exponential growth, the only way to address that is with automation. Unless you're planning on doubling your staff every couple of years, automation is the only way to do it. So you'll see automation in each and every single one of these. Advanced patch management. It's a new product that's GAing in about a week and a half right now. Advanced patch management allows you to set up policies for your environment to say, look, based on the types of patches that we have, based on our patch catalog, what has been patched, what has not been patched, what kind of policies and SLAs are you setting up, and then what kind of, we have automation, again, that helps you deploy that and keep it up to date without needing to manually go in and check each and every single one or each group and say, now it's time to go do it. Supporting over 80 different operating systems and versions. So wide support across the board. And then the future, not here yet, but this is what's coming, is self-service patching. The ability to define a business service, which we already have, but then have that business service out in front so that the owner of that business service understands the risk, understands the risk score of their environment, what patches have been applied, what vulnerabilities exist, what configuration compliance is failing, and then again, provides the automation under the covers so that they can schedule that to occur whenever they want, and we don't have to involve the operations team. Regulatory compliance. Do we have to adhere to PCI or DISA, HIPAA, right? CIS. Everybody should be adhering to CIS anyway. But we have to have the ability to rapidly understand, so this will do the assessment for you also, not just the remediation. So rapidly understand where we have deviated from maybe PCI, for example. We've got servers deployed all over the place. Doesn't matter whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. We can understand if it's compliant with PCI or not, and where it's not, bring it back into compliance. And as things drift away, bring them back automatically. So you'll hear the same themes over and over, understanding and visibility of what's out there with this particular use case, and then automation to help you bring it back into compliance. Configuration management, similar concept, right? But now this is your gold standard. If I'm deploying Red Hat, a particular version of Red Hat, I want to deploy it the same way every single time across my organization. And then I want to understand that configuration drift and be able to bring it right back into compliance with my gold standard, even though it's not regulatory compliance. I also want the ability to go off and understand, for example, the Windows registry without having to log into every single box and pull that information in to see what's been deployed and how compliant is it to our gold standard. Closed loop change and config management exists on all of these products. So if I'm going to apply an automated remediation, well, I might want to go through change management first, wait for it to be reviewed, wait for it to be scheduled and approved, and then have the automation implemented on a particular date and time. Cloud security. So we talked, a lot of this we talked about on-prem and data centers. The cloud is a different animal, right? We don't really have vulnerabilities in the cloud. We do in VMs, but we treat them the same way we would on-prem. What we do have, though, is severe misconfigurations in the cloud. And that's where a lot of the risk comes from if you're dealing with a cloud environment. And I'm going to show you this product in just a second. But this is all SAS-based, and it takes all of 5 minutes from the time that you get an ID until you can see value out of it. We talked also about how can you secure or at least understand your risk for SaaS vendors. Well, this is how you can do it as well. We have a lot of our customers that are using this to actually audit their SaaS vendors. And you can do it in one meeting, in one conference room, inside of 30 minutes. And this is a big challenge for a lot of customers. And we'll take a look at this in just a minute. A couple key points though, it's all SaaS delivered. Right? Supports all the major cloud providers, including on-prem providers. So VMware, Hyper-V, if you've got on-prem, if you've got private cloud. Supports Kubernetes, Docker, OpenShift. A lot of these things are configuration-based security vulnerabilities. So we've deployed something and misconfigured it based on best practices, and we've left it wide open. And we'll show that in a minute. And then with this also, again, comes that automated remediation. We firmly believe that finding your problems, that's half the challenge. Fixing the problems is the other half. And some would say arguably the more difficult half. So we've provided all that capability. So let's take a look at this product real quick. So the concept here is we want to show you how easy it is to use, how quickly you can go in, plug it into your environment, and understand if you have security challenges or not. So this very short video is just going to show you from logging in the very first time, right? Having never used this product before, we just granted you an ID, you log in, it's empty. There's nothing there, right? And we're going to integrate it. We're going to hook it up to AWS, and we're going to scan and understand and see where our challenges are, and then we're going to start fixing problems, and it's going to take 4 minutes at this point. So the first thing we do is add what's called a connector, and we actually have hundreds of connectors all around, but let's go ahead, we're going to choose the AWS connector because we want to hook up to an AWS environment. So we could be hooking up to a Kubernetes cluster, we could be hooking up to a VM farm, any number of things. So the only thing I'm not showing you in this is how you get these two keys, the AWS keys. That takes about another 5 minutes. Go into AWS, set up what's called an IAM rule, and you can set it up for read-only access. The one that we're using happens to have rewrite access because we want to be able to fix our problems, not just find them. So in this particular case, we're going to use a read-only. We plug those two keys in, and the next screen that pops up is our out-of-the-box content. So this is CIS. CIS, the Center for Internet Security. They document exactly how you should define all of the cloud offerings and services that are out there. Each one of these policies has anywhere from 5 to 50 rules in it, depending upon how complex that cloud service is. You could uncheck them if you want, or, as I would suggest, leave all the default content in there. And again, this is just the default content for that AWS connector. We're going to apply it, and we see that we now have a green cloud connector actively running, and that means it is connected to AWS, is connected to that account, and it's starting to consume the data and starting to understand where we have challenges and problems. So if we go back to our dashboard, we should see we now have some data going in. So far, we've taken a look at 22 resources, and we found 44 violations on those 22 resources, which 22 resources is nothing. To be honest, most cloud accounts that we deal with have 10,000 resources, right? So let's refresh, and you'll see that it's up to about 100 resources now with 122 violations. I have yet to plug this into any AWS account and seen, yep, we're good across the board. Inevitably, we've got problems all over the place. If you're dealing with 10,000 resources, you're not going to try to deal with them all at once, right? You want to do some filtering. You want to start understanding in particular areas where you were looking at. So in this case, we're just going to filter for what's called an S3 bucket. S3 buckets are the leading cause of data breaches in the cloud. It's the leading cause of data breaches in SaaS vendors as well. So if I filter for those, I can see I've got 13 of them with 18 violations. And I can drill into just the critical violations, and I can see where my problems are. All those 5 came from this one rule that says, look, you really should not have public access to S3 buckets. Shouldn't exist. That's a bad practice all around. That's one of the CIS rules. I can dive into that and see exactly which one of my buckets have this problem. Now, if I wanted to, I could select them all and then click Remediate. Or in this particular case, I just select one and I click Remediate. And that's it. And we just fix that problem. So that we went 5 whole minutes from having never used the product before, getting an ID to log in, integrating it with AWS, finding out where problems are in our environment, and fixing them in 5 minutes. We do this also with SaaS vendors. We've got some companies that some of our customers want to audit SaaS vendors. So we can go in and sit down in a 1-hour meeting in a boardroom, grab the credentials, plug them in, see exactly if the SaaS vendor is being honest with you. They tell you, hey, your data is secure. Great, prove it. We see exactly where their issues are, and then we delete the connector, which blows all of it away. And it goes back to an empty system, and we walk out the door. So it's a way that we can help identify where the challenges are and solve them. That's the simplicity. That's what we're trying to do across the board with all of our use cases. So with that, my last slide before I invite Steve up to talk about PMC is really just some recognition, right? The Forrester Infrastructure Automation Wave, and this is as of August 2019, so just a couple months ago, recognized BMC as a leader in this space, right? BMC software provides the most functionality of all the solutions that we analyzed or evaluated. So it's nice to know that it's not just BMC standing up here and saying, look, we've got a great set of products and tools that solve this problem. Our our analysts are also coming out and saying the exact same thing. So with that, I want to invite Steve up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's your clicker. Right button.
All right. And just a quick audio check. Can you hear me okay? All right. Fantastic. So thank you, Eric, for that presentation. It really fits extremely well into the content that I'm going to be delivering here. As technologists and leaders in the IT space, we are all acutely aware of the vulnerabilities that are out in the wild and here on a day-to-day basis, the number of breaches that happen, all of the security issues that are happening across the landscape and how they impact us as users, as our data being affected. So how do we manage that in the real world at scale? So I'm going to start off and give you just a little bit of background about PNC so that you can understand really the scale and scope in which we do utilize the BMC portfolio of tools to make us secure and agile at the same time. So currently managing $406 billion worth of assets. So depending upon which optic that you look at, PNC is ranked in between either the 5th or the 13th largest financial institution in the United States. We have, at this point, closer to 10,000 ATMs. We have 35,000 servers, 25,000 network devices, and approximately 2,500 branches. So we are spread pretty wide throughout the continental US. And you can't see the difference in blues there too well, but the darker blue is where we have a brick and mortar presence. So very much in the Midwest and up the eastern seaboard. And then the rest of the country is where we have coverage in support of our digital national expansion. And I'll touch on that here in just a minute. So what I want to do here is kind of turn back the hands of time and let everybody know how PNC and my team at PNC has really utilized the BMC portfolio of tools to start out really with some basic blocking and tackling, making sure that we have things configured properly from the start, and how we evolved into a true agile company that is moving away from your traditional brick and mortar financial institution and one to more that's focused on delivering software. When you think about doing banking these days, very little times does anybody walk into a branch. Everything that everybody does is either through your web browser, on your mobile device. So to keep up with the competitiveness of the industry, you have to really look outside what the normal financial institution would historically mean. Historically, banks would grow through merger and acquisition. You would grow big enough and acquire the next little bank that really fits your kind of portfolio. Well, things are changing with the digital age. Now, we're really not needing to have that physical presence, and we can expand greatly just through some of the technology that we offer. So in knowing this, when we first started out, our corporate initiatives, and when I stood on this stage a year ago and was speaking with Bill Baruti, that night we were actually going live with our TrueSight implementation. And I was up here telling about some of the successes that we had from a patching perspective, from a compliance perspective where we're utilizing, at the time, Blade Logic, and you'll see that as I progress through these slides, that the naming conventions of the products will also change, and that we were using discovery really with the use case of blind spot detection. So at the time, we had a non-BMC CMDB that we were using their discovery program, and some security tools, and we found in some data analysis that between those two, it wasn't covering the entire infrastructure. So the use case there was, we need to find what's on the wire. If you don't know what's on the wire, how are you supposed to secure it? So we plugged that gap, and we also were in the midst of a major data center consolidation. So we went from, I think it was 18 different data centers throughout the US and consolidated to 3 major data centers. In doing so, we looked at things from an architectural perspective and ensured that from really up and down the stack, that we had things configured to meet the architectural standards that we put out so that we can do things at scale and make sure that we have compliance jobs that go out and look for and auto-remediate anything that is detected from the DSOM that we configure within Blade Logic. Same thing on the network side. With the amount of branches that we have and the wide spread footprint that we have a large number of network devices. So it was a real challenge in ensuring that those had consistent configurations, that they're all patched, and that they're up to the standards that we set forth. So that's really how we started. And once we achieved a lot of those goals, we then pivoted to see how we can better take advantage of the entire portfolio. So we have some of that basic blocking and tackling down. Now, how can we get the individual tools to better work together to bring better value? And that's really what we've been focusing on over the last year. So as I've mentioned, we went live with our true site monitoring, and a lot of people would say, well, what does that really have to do with security? And it really has a lot, because knowing what's going on in your environment is a big part of your security posture. I wish security had an easy button, like we all did, and we all do, and you could just hit that easy button and everything would be solved. But I can tell you that it really takes a pragmatic approach to ensuring that not only do you have things patched, you have your compliance configured properly, that you have the capability and the agility to go out and auto-remediate and use things like your integration into the CMDB to track what changes are going on. So that is what really we've been focusing on in the past year, is how do we get the tools to work better together and bring more value? So one of the things that we've done that has brought a lot of value is in the monitoring space, we've pivoted from utilizing discovery just as a blind spot detection tool to providing additional value to our lines of business. So working with them to identify what their business service is, mapping that in discovery, and then publishing that up to the CMDB and ultimately up to TrueSight, giving visibility into what's happening with their application in real time, and giving them the ability to take ownership of the things that are happening in their space. Eric had mentioned about the capabilities with the scheduling of patches. We are very much looking forward to that technology coming forward. We've been starting down that path. We've internally labeled it Agile Patching. And again, this is just going to be one more way that we're exploiting the features and functions that BMC has to allow our customers to become more agile, hold them accountable for security as well, and bring the additional visibility from an enterprise perspective into everything that's happening in the environment. One of the other things that we have been pretty laser focused on over the past really 6 months is when we've really put the most work into this, is automation. So from a corporate perspective, we are tasked with supporting a lot of the DevOps and Agile projects that are going on. As I mentioned, the pivot from being the old brick and mortar financial institution to really being a software company that is producing products that extends the capabilities of what banking can bring to the individual. And to do that, you can't do things in a manual effort. You have to be able to automate what you're doing at scale and do things like auto remediation. So one of the things that we did in the network space was to put together, and again, this is another great example of how we're utilizing the tools in conjunction with each other, is put together what we call a day zero network compliance scan. So we do technology refreshes at our banks on a pretty regular basis. So as that happens, and as new equipment gets put on the wire, you need to ensure that it's configured properly, that it's patched properly, that it is monitored properly, and that you have the correct information in the CMDB. If you don't have one of those 4 things, you have a pretty large security risk on your hands. So we work to utilize the technology between BMC Discovery, Atrium Orchestrator, and the CMDB, so that as installers go out to the branch, they'll go out, automatically launch a web page. It will kick off a scan of that particular branch, identify any net new equipment that is out on the wire. It will talk to BladeLogic Network Automation, ensure that the correct configuration and all of the dysstigs are appropriately applied to the device, update the CMDB, and ultimately put it into our Intuity monitoring. So it's a zero-day complete compliance and monitoring solution that would take, in the past, days or even weeks once people would put in those manual requests to run all of those different activities. It's now done in a matter of seconds. So the value that we're getting out of that is just outstanding. A couple of other things that we've done to bring a lot of value, especially in the monitoring space, is to put together pre-canned automation when events or incidents come into the environment. So there were some very manual processes that people were doing when they saw specific events happening in the environment. One of the ones that we saw some of the best value out of was from our Windows team. Depending upon what was going on in the environment, whether that be antivirus updates or different things that happen as a part of the everyday care and feeding of the environment, you can get disk partitions that will fill up. So our L2 Windows team would go out, run a cleanup script, and get that cleaned up, update the ticket, and doing some evaluation of the time that they were spending on that, they were doing about 50 of these a week. And each touch of the server, it's about 15 minutes to get the incident, log in, run the script. So we approached this with tying together Atrium Orchestrator and our TrueSight monitoring. And anytime that we see that event happen in the environment, we will automatically kick that script off. It will go out, do the remediation, update the change management record to indicate that this happened successfully, and that's what you see right down here. It shows that it was successfully ran, and if it didn't successfully run, it will keep the ticket open and reassign it to the correct team. And if it is successful, go ahead and auto close so that we can give that team some time back. So really the message here is there is no easy button. It takes a lot of time and dedication to ensure that your security posture is one that is at an enterprise level, and you really need to harvest the power of the tools together, and not only the tools, but PNC has a great relationship with BMC as it pertains to the different lines of business. The amount of support that we get from engineering, platinum engineering, R&D, when you get these solutions into the real world, what you'll find is when you run it in a lab, it works great. It does exactly what it does, but you have intricacies within your environment that you need to take, you need to work out solutions for. So having the ability to be agile, work around some of those things, and partnering with BMC, whether it be through services, support, R&D, is really what allowed us to be successful and really put together a great enterprise solution where we're seeing a lot of value. Thank you very much. So I think we have a couple of minutes for some quick Q&A.
For a few minutes, one last thing I'd like to say. The key takeaway I'd like you to understand here is that cybersecurity is about much more than vulnerability management. It's about managing your risk. And managing your risk means, yes, vulnerability management. It also means managing your patches. It means compliance, right, and configuration management. And really the only way to do that when you see what's happening in the industry is to automate. And if you listen to Forrester, right, BMC is the best partner in the world to do this with you. So we're happy to help, and we're happy to take questions if you have any. And we may need to pass the mic off if they have any questions. It's hard to see. No questions? Okay, thank you very much.